If you are retired, close to retirement, or trying to hold on to the home you worked your whole life to keep, this is the moment to pay attention, because a historic new housing law is now on the books. And while a lot of headlines are making it sound like instant relief is coming, the real story is more serious, more complicated, and for many older Americans, potentially life-changing. This new law could affect where you live, what help may become available to repair your home, how affordable senior housing is built, and whether large investors have as much power to swallow up homes in your community. But here is the warning you need to hear right now. None of this means automatic relief. None of this means a check is showing up in your mailbox. And none of this means you can safely wait and assume somebody else will tell you when action is required. For millions of seniors, housing is no longer just about comfort. It is about survival. It is about whether your fixed income can still stretch through the month. It is about whether your rent jumps again. It is about whether your property taxes, repairs, insurance, and utility bills slowly push you out of the home you thought you would stay in for the rest of your life. And it is about whether you can still age with dignity in the community you know, instead of being forced into a move you never planned and cannot afford. That is why this law matters. Not because it solves everything overnight, but because it changes the rules in a fight that has been squeezing older Americans from every direction. I'm Norix Hale, and on Federal Benefit Guide, we break down the policies, benefit changes, and financial developments that can hit seniors the hardest, in plain English, without the spin, without the noise, and without the legal jargon that leaves people more confused than when they started. And today, you need the plain truth, because this housing law has been called one of the most significant housing reforms in more than a decade. And if you only hear the celebratory version, you could miss the parts that actually matter for your wallet, your home, and your next move. First, let's get straight on what happened. Congress overwhelmingly passed a bipartisan package called the 21st Century Road to Housing Act, and it became law in July 2026. The big purpose of the law is simple on paper. America does not have enough affordable housing, and the shortage has been hitting older adults, low-income renters, people with disabilities, and families on fixed budgets especially hard. So lawmakers put together a broad package meant to increase housing supply, modernize old rules, speed up parts of the system, and make certain kinds of housing more practical to build, repair, and preserve. That sounds promising, and parts of it are promising. But whether it changes your life depends on one thing above all else: whether you understand what it actually does, and just as important, what it does not do. Here is the first reality check. This law is not a magic wand. It does not wipe out high rents. It does not slash property taxes nationwide. It does not guarantee lower mortgage rates. It does not create a brand new universal federal benefit for every retiree who owns a home or pays rent. And if you were hoping for a direct monthly housing payment, that is not what this law delivers. What it does instead is create openings, pilots, reforms, protections, and incentives that could expand options and lower pressure over time. In other words, this is not an instant rescue package, it is a structural law. And structural laws can matter deeply, but only if you know where the doors are opening before everybody else rushes toward them. Why is this so critical for people over 60 and 65? Because older Americans are getting trapped in a housing squeeze that feels invisible until it reaches your own doorstep. AARP says more than 70% of adults want to stay in their homes and communities as they age. That sounds simple, but staying put is becoming more expensive every year. Repairs cost more, skilled labor costs more, insurance costs more, rent costs more. Even basic accessibility upgrades like grab bars, railings, ramps, widened doorways, safer bathrooms, and kitchen modifications can cost more than many retirees can manage on Social Security, a pension, or retirement savings that were never built for today's housing market. So when a law creates even a possible pathway to repair help, safer housing, or more affordable options nearby, seniors cannot afford to ignore it. Now let's talk about one of the most important parts for retirees who want to age in place. The law includes a whole home repairs program. In plain language, this opens the door for grants and forgivable loans through state, local, and tribal programs to help with repairs and modifications. And here is why that matters so much. This is not just about patching a roof or fixing a broken stair. The law specifically points to improvements that help older adults and people with disabilities stay safe and functional at home. Things like bathroom modifications, kitchen updates, grab bars, handrails, lifts, ramps, widened doorways, and sidewalk repairs. What this means for you is that housing help is starting to be defined less like cosmetic renovation and more like practical aging support. That distinction is huge. For many seniors, the difference between staying home and losing independence is not dramatic. It is often one fall, one unsafe shower, one staircase that becomes too hard, one doorway too narrow for a walker, one entrance that becomes dangerous in winter, one repair bill that forces a terrible choice between safety and savings. So when people ask whether this housing law could really change life for retirees, this is where the answer starts to become yes. Not because everyone will automatically receive assistance, but because the law recognizes that housing stability for older adults includes accessibility, safety, and repair, not just a roof and four walls. But here comes the crucial caution. These home repair benefits are not likely to appear the same way in every state, county, or city, and they are not automatic. The law creates the framework and support for programs, but viewers should understand that implementation matters. You may need your local or state housing agency to stand up the program, publish the rules, open applications, and define eligibility. So, if you hear me clearly on one step today, hear this. Do not sit back and assume the federal government will call you. If you think you may need home repair or accessibility help, start monitoring your state housing finance agency, your county housing office, your city community development office, and your area agency on aging. The people who move first usually have the best chance when limited funding opens. Next, there is another provision that could matter a lot for seniors living in assisted or subsidized housing. The law creates a temperature sensor pilot program for certain federally assisted rental units, including supportive housing for the elderly and people with disabilities. That may sound technical, but the reason is very real. Extreme heat and poor indoor temperature conditions are not minor discomforts for older adults. They can become health emergencies. Seniors with heart conditions, breathing problems, medication sensitivities, or mobility issues can be placed at serious risk when housing quality is poor and there is no reliable monitoring or enforcement. So while a temperature sensor pilot is not flashy headline material, it points to something bigger. The law is acknowledging that housing quality itself is part of senior protection. There is also an important piece tied to the preservation of affordable housing. The law lifts the cap on the Rental Assistance Demonstration Program by 100,000 units and extends tenant protections in those properties. That may not mean much if you have never heard of RAD, but it matters because many older housing developments need upgrades, preservation work, and financing adjustments to remain usable and affordable. If aging housing stock falls apart or becomes financially unstable, seniors do not just lose buildings. They lose the communities, routines, support networks, and proximity to services that help them survive. So preserving units and strengthening tenant protections can be extremely important for retirees already living in subsidized or assisted settings. Another major area is housing supply. The law pushes reforms meant to make it easier to build more housing, including guidance that could help states and localities allow certain multifamily buildings that were harder to permit under older local rules. In plain English, the government is trying to reduce some of the bottlenecks that stop new housing from getting built. Why does that matter to a retiree? Because when housing supply stays too tight for too long, prices get vicious, rents climb, entry-level homes disappear, downsizing options shrink, adult children struggle to live nearby, caregivers cannot afford to move into the area, and seniors who need a smaller, cheaper, easier to maintain place suddenly discover there is nowhere realistic to go. More supply does not solve every pricing problem overnight, but without more supply, affordability keeps choking the market. The law also includes a major competitive fund for local governments and tribes that increase housing supply through reforms, like streamlined permitting, density changes, and faster approvals. Again, that sounds bureaucratic, but the practical meaning is this. Washington is trying to reward communities that stop blocking housing and start making room for it. For older Americans, that could eventually mean more rentals, more multifamily options, more senior-friendly units, and more modest homes in places where today there are mostly expensive large homes or limited inventory. If you live in a high-cost area and have been wondering why younger families cannot move in, why service workers are disappearing, why neighbors cannot find anything affordable, or why downsizing has become a nightmare, This is part of the answer the law is trying to address. There is also a provision aimed at large institutional investors. The law places restrictions on the purchase of new single-family homes by large firms that own at least 350 single-family homes. This matters because, in many communities, retirees have watched entire neighborhoods change as big investment groups buy homes in bulk, convert them into rentals, and outbid regular people. That can push prices higher and reduce ownership opportunities for families, caregivers, and even retirees looking to relocate. Now, let's be disciplined here. This provision alone is not going to reverse years of investor pressure, but it signals that lawmakers recognize what many seniors have felt for a long time, that housing should not be treated like a casino chip while ordinary people are being priced out of basic shelter. Another part of the law could matter, especially in rural areas and lower-cost communities. The package includes reforms related to manufactured housing, including removing an old federal chassis requirement that experts say added unnecessary cost. Why should retirees care? Because manufactured housing can be one of the few remaining paths to ownership or lower-cost housing for older Americans, especially in places where a traditional site-built home is out of reach. According to experts cited by PBS, removing that requirement could reduce the cost of a manufactured home by several $1,000s. That does not mean free housing, and it does not mean every retiree should rush into manufactured housing, but it does mean one of the country's more affordable housing options may become more practical. Now let's talk about the emotional truth many headlines skip. A historic housing law sounds like relief, but if you are a low-income renter, especially an older renter, you need to understand that some housing experts say the biggest gaps remain. PBS reported that while experts see real value in the law, many provisions are not specifically targeted to the extremely low-income renters who are under the most pressure. And that matters, because older renters are among the most vulnerable groups in this economy. If you own a home, you may have equity, even if you feel cash poor. But if you rent on a fixed income and face repeated increases, fewer units, longer wait lists, and limited assistance, the danger can escalate much faster. The National Low-Income Housing Coalition has been blunt about the shortage. Nationally, there are only 35 affordable and available rental homes for every 100 extremely low-income renter households. Think about that for a second. That is not a normal market imbalance. That is a shortage so severe that millions are forced into impossible math every single month. And for seniors, impossible math becomes dangerous fast. When the rent rises, the grocery budget gets cut. When medication costs go up, utilities get delayed. When a landlord raises the lease again, people start skipping medical appointments, borrowing from relatives, or draining what little savings they spent a lifetime protecting. So yes, this housing law matters, but no, it does not end the emergency for the people in the deepest hole. AARP has also highlighted why older adults are at the center of this problem. Older Americans want to stay in their homes and communities, but many are being squeezed by higher housing costs, maintenance burdens, and the lack of affordable alternatives that fit aging needs. And the trend is getting darker. AARP notes that people 50 and older are the fastest growing population experiencing homelessness in the country. That sentence alone should stop every policymaker in America cold. Because when the fastest growing homeless population includes older adults, that is not just a housing issue. That is a dignity issue. That is a health issue. That is a family issue. That is a moral failure in plain sight. So when you hear the phrase, "Could this change life for retirees?" the honest answer is yes, but in layers. For some homeowners, the biggest change may come through repair grants, accessibility upgrades, and the ability to stay in the home longer and more safely. For some renters, the benefits may come more slowly through improved housing quality, preserved affordable units, and future supply increases. For some families, the change may come from new local building activity, more options for downsizing, or less investor domination in new single-family inventory. And for some seniors in rural or lower-cost areas, reforms to manufactured housing may open a door that used to stay shut. But if you are hoping for immediate relief next week, that is where expectations need to stay grounded. There is another critical point. Almost no one says loudly enough. This law may open doors, but many of those doors still require agencies, local governments, housing providers, and nonprofits to do their jobs. Implementation is everything. If a program is authorized but not effectively rolled out, people can still be left waiting. If funds are available but buried in bureaucracy, seniors can miss out. If local officials do not publicize options well, the people who need help most may never know it exists. And one more issue deserves attention. The law itself says, with limited exceptions, that it does not broadly authorize major new funding across the board. That means some reforms depend heavily on how programs are administered and financed going forward. In simple language, the law is powerful, but it is not limitless. That is why I need you to be careful with political hype from either side. If someone tells you this law changes nothing, that is not true. It contains meaningful reforms that could improve housing access, safety, preservation, and affordability pressures over time. But if someone tells you this law solves the housing crisis for seniors, that is also not true. It does not erase the shortage overnight. It does not replace the need for local action. It does not instantly protect every renter. It does not remove the need for more investment in deeply affordable housing. And it definitely does not mean you can ignore your own housing plan and wait for Washington to rescue you later. What this means for you right now depends on your situation. If you own your home and need repairs, especially safety or accessibility repairs, start preparing a folder now. Keep proof of income, proof of ownership or tenancy, identification, photographs of repair needs, contractor estimates if you can get them, and a written summary of the modifications that would help you remain independent. If you rent, especially in assisted or subsidized housing, keep track of maintenance issues, heat-related concerns, inspection delays, and lease changes. If you are trying to downsize, start watching whether your area announces new housing projects, local zoning changes, or senior-focused developments. And if you live in a rural area or are considering manufactured housing, pay close attention to new financing and pricing trends over the coming months. You should also begin contacting the right people, not after a crisis, but before one. Reach out to your local public housing authority. Check with your state housing finance agency. Contact your county aging office or area agency on aging. If you are in or near subsidized senior housing, ask management what changes they expect under the new law. If you use a housing voucher or are on a waiting list, ask whether inspection changes or preservation efforts could affect unit availability. If you are caring for an older parent, do this for them now, because many seniors miss benefits and local help simply because the paperwork, phone calls, or online searching becomes overwhelming at exactly the wrong moment. And let me say this directly to family members. Do not assume your parent or grandparent will tell you when housing pressure becomes unbearable. Many older adults stay quiet far too long. They do not want to feel like a burden. They do not want to admit the rent is no longer manageable. They do not want to say the stairs have become risky. They do not want to reveal that the bathroom is unsafe or the repairs keep getting postponed because the money is gone. This new law may create useful options, but those options only matter if someone starts the conversation early. Ask now. Is the home still safe? Is the rent still manageable? Are repairs being delayed? Is downsizing becoming necessary? Is isolation making housing harder to maintain? These are not small questions anymore. For retirees watching this, the biggest mistake would be treating this story like background political noise. Housing policy is no longer distant. It is personal. It affects whether you keep independence or lose it. It affects whether your retirement dollars stretch or snap. It affects whether your adult children can live near enough to help. It affects whether caregivers, aides, and support services remain available in your community. It affects whether older Americans are given a real chance to age in place or slowly push toward instability by costs that never stop rising. That is why this law deserves your attention, even if the real benefits take time to unfold. So, here is the bottom line. A historic housing law has passed, and yes, it could change life for retirees, but not because the government suddenly fixed everything. It could change life because it creates new repair pathways, supports safer and more accessible housing, preserves some affordable units, encourages more building, pushes back on some investor pressure, and recognizes that housing for older adults is a national issue that can no longer be ignored. At the same time, it leaves major gaps, especially for the lowest income renters, and it still depends on local action, implementation, and follow-through. In other words, this is not the finish line, it is an opening. And openings only help the people who move through them. So, the next step is simple and urgent. Do not wait for a crisis. Start checking your local housing resources now. Ask about home repair help. accessibility grants, subsidized senior housing, voucher processes, inspection changes, and local affordable housing developments. If you are helping a loved one, do it with them this week. And if you want clear, steady updates on the laws, benefit changes, and financial stories that can directly affect older Americans, stay with Federal Benefit Guide. Because here, we do not just tell you what passed. We tell you what it means for your daily life, your money, and your future. I'm Norix Hale, and if this issue touches your household, now is the time to pay attention, ask questions, and get ahead of the change before the change decides your options for you.